we were hoping to be to the panel discussion by now, but I don't want to do that until I get, we change directions a little bit with our speakers. I think we've had great presentations so far that explain the risks. We're all scared, we're all angry about it. Now the question is, what do we do about it? And for that, we're going to turn to Representative Yousef Rabhi to give us kind of a legislative angle on Line 5 and maybe talk a little bit about how we can lobby our lawmakers, governor, et cetera. So if you wouldn't mind coming up and saying a few words about that, and then we'll switch to the panel. Oh, okay.
Awesome. Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for coming out today. This is a very important topic, obviously, one that everybody in this room cares deeply about, and I do as well. We're also joined by Senator Rick Jones, who's going to be addressing us in just a few minutes after I'm done. I thought he was going to go first, so I thought I had a little bit more time, but looking forward to hearing what he has to say. He's been a great advocate on this issue, and I feel like every event that I go to about this, he's there too, because he's been doing some great work on the Senate side, on the other side of the aisle, and on the other side of the House, or on the other side of the chambers. So, but what I want to talk about today is just basically some of the work that I've been doing, some of the barriers that I've been running into, and some of the things that citizens around the state, I think, could be doing to help organize around this issue. So obviously we know about the problem with Line 5. We know that it's a concern for all of us. It's a threat to our Great Lakes. And I always go back to an experience that I had back in 2015. I see that Gail Steiner is here, former colleague from the Botanical Gardens and Arboretum. I was actually sent by the Botanical Gardens and Arboretum to a conference. That's where I worked before I came to the legislature. I was sent for a conference to California. And in California, I arrived in September. Well, 6 months earlier in May, one of their oil rigs, offshore oil rigs, had a spill. And oil had spilled from the rig and flowed onto the coast. Now, they had done some cleanup work, but again, it was 6 months later. And I remember going down to the beach to, check out the water, because you're in California, why not go down to the beach? And being struck by the fact that there was still oil on the beach. There was still oil in the sand. I would look down and it would look like little black rocks, but it was actually oil. When you go down to pick it up, it's little oil beads in the sand. Not to mention the massive parts of the beach that were closed off, basically because, it was just big. It almost looked like pavement, but it was sand and beach debris all trapped in these big piles of black tar on the beach. So that's sort of the reference point for me. And then, obviously comparing that to the many fond memories that I have spending time on the beaches of the Great Lakes. Is that the legacy that we want to leave for our children? What kind of state do we want to leave behind? What state do we want to have for ourselves? Do we want to still be able to enjoy the Great Lakes and spend time on the beaches with our families? Or do we want to have to be cautious for when we're going to step on oil? Do we want to shut down entire beaches that we're not going to be able to use? So that's the framework for me, the personal framework. Legislatively, I introduced House Resolution 51, which calls on the governor and the attorney general to exercise their authority and shut down the easement of Line 5. That resolution was co-signed by 19 of my colleagues, including one Republican, who joined together to do that, to call on the governor about Line 5. Since then, there have been a lot of activities around House Resolution 51, people organizing, calling in to their representatives and senators to ask them to support that bill, or that resolution. And there have been lobby days as well. People have come to Lansing and met with, and I see some folks in the audience that were in Lansing lobbying, hundreds of people. So there's been a lot of great activity around House Resolution 51. And then Rick Jones is going to tell you about what he's doing on the Senate side, which is also really cool. But I also wanted to touch on a few other bills that I've introduced that I'm hoping will get some traction. They haven't been as publicized as House Resolution 51 has. But I recently introduced a bill as part of a pipeline safety package that would basically make it so that any pipeline company would be required to actually have a cleanup plan in place and to work with local authorities to make sure that a response plan was available. And part of that bill package actually requires that drills be done to actually show what a response plan would look like in the event of a spill. So not just saying we can respond in 8 minutes, but actually, just like a fire drill when you're in school, actually showing that it can be done. And so that's part of that bill. And again, that bill would also require a notification to the local authorities, so that something like the Kalamazoo spill, in terms of the reporting, the line of reporting, it would be illegal to not report it directly to the Department of Environmental Quality and the federal government under that legislation. It was part of a bill package with a number of my other colleagues. One of the other bills would make the fine substantially higher for any pipeline company that did spill, a daily fine of $500,000. In addition to increasing other fines throughout that these companies could be fined with. So that was one of the bills. Then the other bill package is slightly on a different topic, but I think it's important for this group as well. We have an issue with the oil and gas extraction side as well. I mean, obviously, this is part of the equation. And when oil and gas is extracted, a lot of methane is released into the atmosphere. Methane is the worst greenhouse gas, and obviously is causing a lot of the global climate change that we're seeing these days. And I have a bill that would require any oil and gas operation that operates in the state of Michigan to have a methane recapture system so that none of that would be re-emitted into the atmosphere. As part of that bill package, there's also a bill that would require a public hearing in a community that an oil and gas well is going to be situated. Right now, there is no requirement for that. So an oil or gas well could situate in a community without the community having any input in that process directly. So this bill would actually require that a public hearing be held in the community where the oil and gas operation is going to be situated if that community requests it. And the third bill in that package makes it illegal to spread basically fracking waste onto roads, which is done as a dust control mechanism. So there's a lot of good stuff going on in Lansing right now. There's a lot of people, elected representatives and members of the public, fighting the good fight on these issues, trying to advocate for the Michigan that we all know is possible, right? A Michigan that values clean water and clean air, basic things that we need and rely on as human beings. And everybody in this room, I think, has an opportunity. Line 5 is a rallying call across this state. People in rural areas and urban areas alike are coming together around this issue. The barriers that are still in place to us getting real traction on this issue, number one is the issue of money and politics. Just like you see the oil sloshing around from Lake Michigan to Lake Huron, there's a lot of money sloshing around in Lansing too. There's been a money truck spill in Lansing, and it sloshes around from the two houses. So that's one of the major issues, and it's something that, I hate to say it, I see it every day. When I'm on the floor of the House, I'm asking people to co-sign my bills. People say, I'm not going to co-sign that because you know what? I get a lot of money from this or that or this entities. That's not acceptable. That's not how we should do politics. We need to address the issue of money and politics in this state and around this country. Two other quick points. I'm getting the time out, and I know I have to end here. But I do want to also say an issue that we need to talk about that hasn't been discussed yet. The two main concerns that I hear from people, pushback from people on Line 5, is number one, from people from representatives who serve the Upper Peninsula who say, well, my people rely on the natural gas from the pipeline. We need to have a credible response for those individuals to let them know that we're not going to take away their ability to heat their homes. And some of the things that were talked about earlier are alternatives that I think would work. But we need to make sure that we're having those conversations with our friends in the Upper Peninsula and engaging people in the Upper Peninsula to be advocates for this as well. Their voice, I think, in this is as important as everybody else's, if not more important right now. And the third thing that I want to mention, and the second point of pushback that I hear from people, is from workers. People who say, you're trying to take my job away. You're taking my job away because you're shutting this pipeline down. And so there are a number of jobs associated with this pipeline. And unfortunately, a lot of times what we're seeing with issues like this and other environmental issues is corporations and labor entities are sort of working hand in hand to push away environmental reforms that could make a real difference for our environmental health and welfare in the state. So we need to find a way to work with the workers, the labor community, to make sure that we're engaging them in this discussion and doing all of the things that we're talking about in a way that helps to empower people to continue to have good paying jobs in Michigan, and supporting the folks in the labor community to make sure that they're part of this discussion as well. And I think if we can do those two things, and if we can work on the issue of money in politics, I think that we can make real progress on not only Line 5, but other environmental issues as well, like I talked about earlier. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and hand it over to my Senate colleague, who maybe there's a brief introduction in between, or I can just hand it straight off to him, however you want to do it. So with that, thank you all again for coming out, and Senator Rick Jones, everybody. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm a Republican from Grand Ledge. I tell you that so you know this is a bipartisan fight. Senator Margaret O'Brien is a huge supporter of my bill. I have support from Senator Schuette up north, Senator Rocca in Macomb County, all Republicans. This is not a Democrat or Republican issue. It is a human issue, and we've got to stop big oil. Here's the problem. Every senator and representative, they're told the Michigan Constitution requires you to do everything you can to protect the great resources of the state. But what's the number one resource? Number one resource are the Great Lakes, this beautiful, pure water. And some people don't take that real seriously. I do. So when I found out we had invasive species, I did everything I could to fight that. When I found out we had corporations that wanted giant floating fish farms, creating massive amounts of fish waste in a small area, creating algae blooms and all sorts of problems, I fought that. And then it was common sense to me that you don't have oil lines under Great Lakes water. It's just plain common sense. But here's what really brought it home to me. I grew up down in Battle Creek. My mother-in-law lived in Marshall, Michigan. That pipeline broke, and she had to sell her house. She was an elderly woman. Now, she wasn't right on the river. She was a moderate income, so she was across the roadway in a moderate home. Unfortunately, she was elderly, and she accepted it. But it could have been some young person's dream home that they had to sell. So she had to sell out to Enbridge and move on to a senior home. And that shouldn't happen in this state. It shouldn't happen because they promise us everything is right. Well, it's not if the line is going to break, it's when. It's going to happen. Now, there's three legs of the stool that hold up the state of Michigan: manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism. Now, what is that going to do to the pure Michigan image? How much tourism are we going to lose when this thing breaks? $7 billion come in from fishing, if you count all the money that's made by Canada and all the states and Michigan around the Great Lakes. That's going to be harmed. And what about the 40 million people that drink the water? 40 million. Remember that number. And we're going to be adding, Genesee County is going to hook up to Huron. Ottawa County is probably going to have to hook up to Lake Michigan because some of their wells are starting to draw salt. So this is our resource. This is our drinking water. We can't play games with a 64-year-old pipeline. It's going to break sooner or later. They should immediately make plans to reroute it. Well, I wrote a Senate bill, this year it's 292, I had it in last session. And what that bill does is it says that the pipeline must be inspected by outside authority, and if there's any defect at all reported, that Michigan shall and will shut it down, and no more pipelines will ever be allowed under Great Lakes water, period. Period. Now, last term when I put that in, one day after I had that in, Enbridge flew in. They flew lobbyists in from Texas and Canada and everywhere. They're in my office screaming and hollering at me, and all of the myths that they sell, oh, it's going to drive gasoline prices up in Michigan. You know, we're going to lose a lot of oil that we send down to the Detroit refinery. Of course, you know, they don't like to tell you that most of it goes to Sarnia. and it's simply Canadian oil taking a shortcut through our Great Lakes, which makes no sense at all. Now, they got the Yoopers on their side. They've convinced the Yoopers you're going to lose jobs, you aren't going to have any propane to heat your homes. Baloney. Baloney. And I can tell you that he's right, that the minute they left my office, they were going around, and I'm not saying anything illegal was done. It's legal to have a PAC and make contributions, but I heard the money flowed. And the only way we can beat a big oil company is to bring on the pressure. They asked me to speak real briefly. What can you do? Contact not just your representatives and your senators in the state, but contact them at the national level, your congressmen, your senators, and tell them you want it stopped. You want the Great Lakes protected. This isn't something we can gamble with. This is the future for our children. This oil spill will really harm us, so let's all stick together. Thank you.